Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to finish this sculpture up, and I wanted to put some more details in the hands and the arms. I finished hollowing out the sculpture. I uploaded the video, so check that out. I made it a separate video. A lot of people have been asking me like how I do the hollowing, and often I'll just do a time lapse as I'm working, and I'll remove a lot of the clay. But it's important to do this in water-based clay. So now the point is to kind of finish things up. I've always struggled with this process of the sculpture because I keep going back and forth between finishing and unfinished because I want to keep working on it. But sometimes you just have to push yourself to finish. So what I'm concentrating is the details, where bony landmarks are, for example, here in the lower leg. Adding details to the feet, adding details to the hands, adding the bones to the hands so it looks a little bit more realistic. You know, there is a saying that if you really want realism, you want to look for a live model, because when you work from photographs, it's a lot harder. So there are live models that will pose for you, and most of the time they're free. For example, you using a mirror. That's probably the best way of doing a sculpture. But if you don't have that, get together with your friends, maybe pool up your money and hire a model. A lot of people will want to pose for you if you're doing a portrait. But for me, I tend to use reference from photos, and if you're doing like animals and almost imagination stuff, you're not going to get models for that, of course. So I am just finishing all of this up, creating a little bit more detailed where I think it needs it, and I'm trying to keep things a little bit looser. I think one of my problems is that I try and create a little bit too much detail, and sometimes keeping things simple is better. I've talked to you guys before about why I use water-based clay. I do have oil-based clay and I love it, but I just love the idea of water-based clay being the one that the sculptor himself touches and fires, and there's one permanent piece. Now for this, I've already scanned it as well. So that's the last thing that I'm going to do with this. And that way I can print it in a 3D printer. So you have that option as well. But it's not as permanent as a water-based clay sculpture. The silicone tools, I find myself using them quite a bit for this size, and I didn't realize I would like them as much, but I like the flatness that they create. It's almost the same as the dental metal tool that I use, but when you look at old sculptures, oftentimes they don't have a lot of curvature to it. They're almost like flat, and they have edges to them, and that's how they create the direction of the muscles, by creating things a little bit flatter. When you look at new sculptors, they tend to curve things a little bit too much, and I think that's one of the things I don't particularly like about contemporary 20th century and up type of sculptures. It's become a little bit too hyper realistic, or the details are not there. It's as if they're trying to create things to be smooth as opposed to being good, if that makes any sense. One of the best tools is also these burlap cloths that you can get, and to quickly remove a lot of the unwanted detail. This little dental tool works really great for adding detail to the edges of the head. And if you were to look at the head up close, it might look disheveled. And then you take a step back and it all comes into place. That's kind of like one of the goals I go after. I don't want too much realism. And at least that's my goal for this year, is to create sculptures that are perhaps a little bit more impressionistic, and less detailed. The brushes also work great for blending in some of the clay together. Don't get carried away with detail. I think that's probably one of the more important things. A lot of people ask me, it's like, how do I sculpt hair? How do I create the strands of hair? And when you're asking that, you're asking for too much detail. You need to configure everything into shapes. So at this point, I am just really like trying to hone in on some of the muscle groups of the arm. And I've been trying to make it a little bit too thin. So I increased a little bit of the arm size so she looks like she's a little bit bulkier. And all the fat pads that are touching bony landmarks, I curved them a little bit. That way it looks like there's more fat touching the bones. We're nearing the end and we need suggestions for the next sculpture. So if you guys don't mind, post in the comments below. Tell me what I should be sculpting next. I would really appreciate it. This is the most difficult part, is figuring out what's next. This cloth works really well to get into very difficult to reach areas. That's also one of the reasons I like to use bristle brushes. Oil bristle brushes, because you can get into the parts where your fingers and your hands can't really get into, like in between the legs, under the leg, the feet, the heel of the foot. Those are very difficult for a normal sized hand. So if you have a cloth, you can get there a little bit easier and remove a lot of the unwanted detail. The bristle brushes work really well to get into very difficult spots. And there we go, 2023. And at this point, I'm going to scan it using my Creality Lizard 3D scanner. And I'll be posting it up on my Thingiverse and my Patreon page. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was pretty fun sculpting a plus size model. I really enjoy it. And I really appreciate the suggestions for the helmet. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.